Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Wells.
We appreciate the support on all of our recent content. It does not go unnoticed. We hope the change in the format hasn't thrown anybody off too much, but we are covering two teams in these videos now. So we're moving through the Eastern Conference and we're wrapping up the Central Division. Before we introduce the two teams for this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast for updates.
So we have two teams coming up, like you mentioned. We're finishing up the Central Division, and so those two teams are the Milwaukee Bucks and the Chicago Bulls. So we're gonna start with the Milwaukee Bucks first, I think.
Yeah.
So, obviously last season really didn't go the way that I think a lot of people expected it to. I mean, they had a really good regular season. I think they were 58 and 24, had the best record in the East, best record in the NBA, I believe.
Yep.
Um, you know, Drew Holiday was an all-star, right? Had one of his best seasons, ever, pretty much. I think he's only been an all-star twice, and that was I think it was 2013 in Philly and then last season. Um, Despite Chris Middleton missing a lot of time and not really looking like himself, right? They still won a ton of games. He only played in 33 games, right? And averaged 15 and 4 and 5, right? Shot 44% from the field, 32 from 3. So really a down year. And again, a lot of that was due to injury. But a lot of people, including myself, believe that, by the time the playoffs would roll around, they'd be healthy and they'd be primed and ready to make another run. I did pick them to win the title last year, and they went out in the first round. They lost to the
Yeah.
Miami Heat
It was rough.
uh, in 5 games. One of the handful of times that an eighth seed beat a number one seed in the first round, and it was pretty bad. I mean, obviously it started off with Giannis getting hurt, so we can't forget about that as well, right? Of course, because that's something that I think maybe kind of lost right in the discussion of how the heck did they lose to Miami? And you got to start off with their best player was hurt, but at the same time, I think most of us still felt like they were probably going to win the series, and
Yeah.
it just didn't work out, right? And it was especially bad late in games, right? Because they had back-to-back games in games 4 and 5 where they had double-digit leads in the fourth and just couldn't close the deal. They couldn't score down the stretch. Jimmy Butler also, played like a monster, and they didn't really have anybody who could really guard him, I don't think. Um, and then obviously, right, it it just went completely haywire, went completely south. They ended up firing their coach Mike Budenholzer, who did deliver them to a title just a couple seasons ago, right? 2021. So I
Yes.
mean, yeah, exactly. So 2 years ago, basically. So then they hired Adrian Griffin to replace him, right? Former player. We'll see what he does as a rookie head coach. But now this team is officially on the clock, I think, right? Because obviously we've heard rumors about Giannis potentially being, a free agent, eventually maybe not signing his extension. We'll see. And, there's reasons to continue to be optimistic about the roster because, you can always say that, well, last season was just kind of a fluke just because of the injuries. Um, but at the same time, I think there is a little bit of cause for concern just because of the age of some of the core guys. But, let's get into their roster, to start off, right? So
Sure.
pretty much the same starting five, right? Drew Holiday, Grayson Allen, Chris Middleton, Giannis, and Brooke Lopez, right? Brooke Lopez was, a guy that a lot of people weren't sure about whether or not he would stick around. We both predicted that he would re-sign with the Bucks. Um, I think he ended up getting more than we expected, but we also were of the mindset that, hey, he's a big part of their team. I think he was one of the finalists for Defensive Player of the Year last year,
Mm-hmm.
right? A guy that, as a big center, right, he can protect the rim while also shooting the three at a really good clip, and he can space the floor for Giannis. Makes the Bucks team that much bigger and that much more physical, right? Basically sign him to a 2 year, $48 million contract. So, we'll see what he looks like, coming off of a contract year right now, a new contract. He's also older at this point. Um, so we'll see, right? I mean, in my opinion, I think they kind of had to bring him back just because,
Yes.
again, there was no real way to replace him, with whomever else they could have had on the roster, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have Bobby Portis, but he's a different player than Brooke Lopez, right? Because he's more so of an offensive minded guy. He doesn't bring the same rim protection.
Yeah, and he's
Um,
more of a four, in my opinion, anyways.
right. Yeah, exactly. So, then you look at some of the backups, right? You got guys like Pat Connaughton, right? Jay Crowder they brought back, right? Bobby Portis is still around. They brought in Robin Lopez, right, as another backup big. Um, Marjan Beauchamp, right? That was a guy they drafted a year ago, right? We'll see. I think he would probably need to have, another step forward in his second season, right? Because
Yeah.
They didn't really sign a whole lot of guys in this offseason, right? They brought back Thanasis, right? Who's obviously, a locker room guy, has a great relationship with his brother, Giannis. Um, then they also drafted Chris Livingston and Andre Jackson Jr. Andre Jackson Jr. was their first round pick. I believe he was part of the UConn championship team.
Yeah,
We
he
talked
was.
about him, I think,
Yes, we
and
did.
we also, yeah, exactly. And we saw him in the summer league, right? He's got some solid defensive capabilities, just not really a great outside shooter. So that's going to kind of, I think, determine his ceiling as a player.
Hmm.
Um, and then, Chris Livingston, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know as much about him. I remember the idea that I think he was a clutch client, right? And I think, they had said like, yeah, he's got a draft spot locked up in the second round.
Yes,
So he
that
was
was the
pretty
rumor around him.
yeah, exactly. So I'm not quite as familiar with him. I know he's more of like another forward, but maybe I think a little bit more about him.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think he went to Kentucky. He's a decent player. I mean, he only averaged I think around like 6 points, 4 rebounds, but he had a higher I think hype train in more so high school than college. But I think he's gonna be a valuable bench player, but no like superstar in the making in my opinion. But he could add to a rotational aspect of a team.
Right. And then, their, I guess, other, free agent addition, right, was Malik Beasley, right, who played for the Lakers last year, right, to add some 3-point shooting, depth to the roster, right, and I guess some additional guard depth. Um, so, overall, like, it's a roster that I think is relatively similar to last year, right? There were a couple of guys that they let go, right, like Joe Ingles, and Javon Carter, right? And, they'll probably miss those guys, at least, in some capacity,
Yeah,
right? You still have size, you still have Giannis, right, who's one of the best players in the league, right? Rebounding, defense, obviously. The weaknesses, right? Like, they do shoot a lot of threes at times, but again, there are times when the offense does kind of bog down, as we saw in the playoffs. We'll see what Adrian Griffin can do to shore that up. Um, but also it just comes down to, again, the health of the stars as well, right? Like all three of their main guys missed some time last year. Middleton just hasn't been himself the last season and a half, basically, right? He had a couple of decent playoff games, but just in general, it just wasn't enough.
right.
He also re-signed, a new, I guess, contract as well, right, for 3 years. So not really a big deal. Um, but like I said, I think the main key here is that, again, what are you getting out of him, right? Because the year they won the title, he was basically their second best player and almost kind of like a co-star
Sure.
in a way, to be honest, right? Where, he was much better than he was last year. But,
He was an
if
all-star that season too, I think, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. So if he's not that type of player, right, then that, I think makes it a lot tougher for this team. And again, Drew Holiday, he's also now in his 30s, right? So, what does he look like, going forward, right? He should still be pretty good. He just came off an all-star season, right? But again, he is 33. He's gonna be 34, during the season. So, he's already played 14 years. So that's already kind of getting up there in age, right? Brooke Lopez, as I mentioned, also he's an older guy, as well. He's 35. He's going to be 36, going into the season. So that's another concern as well. So you know, I don't know how to do. I really don't know a whole lot of what to say about it at this point. I guess my thought process is that I do feel like they are still going to be one of the best teams. They're still going to contend, but after seeing what happened in last year's playoffs, I know like obviously we can, I do think a lot of it ties into the honest injury, but
for sure.
I can't say that I'm not at least somewhat concerned based off of what I saw from last year's playoffs. Like I said, I still think they'll be really good. I just think some of it hinges on the health. And then like, even the guard depth, like, I'm just not sure about, right? Like they have a couple of guys that can play back and forth, like a Connaughton, but then it's like Grayson Allen. Can I trust him in the playoffs? I'm not really sure. Um,
Probably not.
Malik Beasley, he was shooting, he didn't shoot great for the Lakers. So maybe he shoots better in Milwaukee. And then, you don't even really have like a backup point guard, right? Like Javon Carter's gone and they didn't really replace him with anybody. Maybe that's somebody they can kind of like look for at the trade deadline. But I would just think just in general, again, considering, some of these guys' ages, like you probably would like to have some type of point guard who can kind of just step in, for Holiday and kind of give him some breaks, right? Because he does have a really, tough job, right? Because he's running a decent chunk of the offense while also guarding the other team's, typically best opposing guard. So,
Sure.
you know, I'm kind of surprised that they ended up not replacing, Javon Carter with anybody. But also at the same time with the new CBA, some of these teams are going to make more sacrifices, and I don't think the Bucks have really had, at different points, like the reputation of we're going to spend whatever it takes, to make sure that we do what we got to do to win a title. I mean, they have had expensive rosters, but they have let some other guys go as well. So
Yeah,
that's where I think there's some cause for concern. But otherwise they should still be really good. It's just last year I think going into the playoffs, a lot of people had them as pretty significant favorites, or at the very least the favorites. I don't know if they're going to go into next season as the favorites.
sure.
Even in the Eastern Conference, we'll see. But what are your thoughts
I mean,
overall
like
in this?
for me, I agree with you somewhat, but for me, like I'm looking at this roster and the way that I'm looking at it is, they didn't really lose their identity. I don't think they strayed too far from their identity, which is a plus. That's definitely gonna, impact their grade in a positive way. It's probably just gonna be the same offense. Get Giannis the ball, or we shoot threes and we play defense. That's pretty much what it is. It's a 3-and-D team, but Giannis is the main guy. And I think that's something that's probably going to continue to work until they probably run into a bigger team, hopefully like Denver in the finals. I really want to see, Milwaukee versus Denver in the finals. I think that would be fantastic. Um but yeah, in general, I don't really have any problems with the roster except for like you said that guard depth. It is kind of funky. Seems like they have a bunch of like two guards. They can all do different things, but none of them can really do what Drew Holiday does, in the second unit. So it's kind of weird. I like you said, I hope they do go out and get somebody at the trade deadline that's, obviously you can't replicate what Drew Holiday can do, but somebody to command that second unit as the point guard. So I'm very curious to see what they do there because I feel like Connaughton's just not really a point guard per se. I know he can bring up the
No,
ball, but no, not really. And then Grayson Allen, like you said, no. Malik Beasley, no. Maybe Marjan, but I don't know. From what I saw in the summer league, he seems to be more of like a scorer. I don't know, but I could be mistaken. Um,
right?
and
Yeah,
then obviously Malik Beasley's not a point guard either, so they do need to do something. I think at that position because I don't know how much, like you said, Drew Holiday has left in the tank. I don't know if that workload for him is going to be um, I don't know how it's going to work out. Like, is that going to be too much for him? I don't know. I feel like they do need to get somebody at the deadline, but
right.
overall,
Because
I
it
do like the roster.
Yeah, because it did feel like in the playoffs, he also kind of ran out of gas, I think,
Yeah,
as
with the
well. And again, like
turnovers.
that's a yeah, and that's also, and in fairness, like it's a tough ask, like if Giannis is out,
Right.
and like Holiday and Middleton are kind of like we have to be kind of like Giannis esque, if
That's
we're
not
gonna win.
possible.
But yeah, and that's not possible, because there are limitations to their games, right? Like Holiday added a pull up three. It seemed like last season, but it didn't fall at all in the
It
playoffs.
was rough.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then again, like, I mentioned with the issue with Butler, right? It didn't seem like they had any real wings that were capable of guarding, Jimmy
Right.
Butler. You would think, like, at certain points, like Giannis would probably, maybe do the trick, but, it seemed like they didn't really go to that. And in fairness, because he was hurt, right? How much can they really, like,
Right.
ask, him to do that as well? So, we'll see if he kind of, like, does some of that under Adrian Griffin. But because that's the only other thing I can think of. Because it's like I don't really trust a guy like a Jay Crowder at this point, to kind of guard guys like a Jimmy Butler,
Right.
like a Jason Tatum or somebody like that. I don't really trust that. And then like even with Middleton, his defense, the title year and before was pretty solid. It
Yeah.
felt like it wasn't as good last year. And again, I think a lot of that was due to injuries. And again, like if he can get back to what he was, right, then you can kind of mitigate
It's a
that
different
somewhat.
conversation.
Yeah, but if not, right, then you got some real concerns. So as I mentioned, right, I do think they're kind of on the clock because again they already fired the coach and replaced him with somebody else, right? It's a guy clearly Giannis wanted, but again, what happens if it doesn't work out? This year, right? Like obviously, I don't think anything's going to happen like this offseason. I don't think, but again, Giannis is entering his prime, right? He should be competing for titles every year.
Hmm.
And if Milwaukee gets to a point where it seems like they might have kind of hit their ceiling and just kind of just capped out, then I don't know. I don't know
Right.
what happens. 'Cause again, like, your other core guys are all older guys other than Giannis, right? Because again, everyone else I mentioned, Holiday, Middleton, Lopez, those are all guys that are in their 30s. And, Lopez and Holiday are really getting up there. So,
Right.
again, they've been in the league, like I said, for basically 15 years at this point. So, that's something that I think, is going to have to be addressed at some point down the line, right? Because again, maybe with Middleton, do you maybe look to move him at some point in the future? Because his contract is relatively short term, 3 years, not a terrible deal. Or somebody else, I don't know. But either way, I do think that they are going to go into this season with more questions. But like I said, I still believe that this team, can contend for the title. I just don't know if they're going to go in as the favorites. But they're also in the East, so it may not even really matter. You know what I mean? It's
I
like,
think they'll be the favorites in the East, and I think a lot of people will still pick them over a lot of Eastern Conference teams because I feel like the East is just generally not more scripted, but it's more you can visualize it better. I think you can see who's like a really really good team and who has like no shot of even getting out of the first round. So
right,
this team needs to actually, show us that they have what it takes to get back there. I think maybe the fact that they've won the championship in 2021 we may be overhyping them a little bit to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe the window is gone completely because a lot of these guys just can't compete in the playoff environment anymore. But who knows? I like you said, I feel like as long as Giannis is on this team, they need to be in the playoffs and they need to honestly be in the finals coming out of the East every year with how weak the East is.
yeah. Because I mean, and again, like like we mentioned with a lot of teams, health will dictate it as well. Because all their core guys for the most part have missed significant time.
Right.
At one point or another last year, right? Like Holiday was relatively healthy. I think he played 67 games. But again, it seemed like he might have kind of broke down by the time the playoffs rolled around. Lopez was pretty healthy because he had a back issue 2 seasons ago.
Right.
Giannis played in 63 games, and like I mentioned, Middleton only played in 33. So, and despite that, they won a lot of regular season games. It's just, hopefully the playoff, atmosphere and environment can, improve. Because, again, you would think with a team that had already won a title that, something like last year didn't happen. But again, you could also, in fairness, chalk it up to injury. Let's see what happens, if they go into next postseason with a healthy roster.
Sure.
Like, that's where I think there's still some level of like, hope and optimism, because again, they're also in the East, right? It'd be harder to do that in the West, but I think in the Eastern Conference you might be okay.
But this is a solid roster. I think it's put together very well, outside of maybe the backup guard like you were saying. So really no like any like grips and gripes with this roster outside of that point guard position backup that is.
Right.
But in general,
Yeah.
I like the way it's put together. I think they've distributed the salary the best that they could have, and they brought back their key guys because I know there was a big question if either of those guys was going to return, in Chris Middleton or Brooke Lopez. But bringing them back is definitely a solid thing.
Yeah. The over under has them, 52 and a half, 53 and a half, basically right behind Boston. So again, like they should be one of the top 2, 3 teams in the Eastern
Yes,
Conference this season, as long as they're healthy.
yes.
So I guess, what grade would you kind of give the Bucks, for their offseason, I guess? Because, like I think some people are going to be kind of, like I said, I think this is going to be a potentially polarizing one for some
Sure.
people.
I would probably go with a B on this one. I don't think they improved to the point where I can say they're like leaps and bounds better than last year, but I think they've done enough to the point where they've constructed a solid roster. Like I was saying earlier, they brought back their key guys. I think that was the number one thing they needed to do. To secure, the fact that they have a chance to actually go to the finals. That's all they need is a chance to go to the finals. So bringing back Chris Middleton, Brooke Lopez, all solid. I think the draft was a little bit shaky. I'm not too high on their picks. You already know how I feel about Andre Jackson Jr., but in general, I think this is a solid roster and a solid offseason. They got the coach, they got the guy that Giannis wanted, so they kept their superstar happy and kept, the core glue and their identity together.
Yeah. I might go a little bit harsher. I might like lean more into like the C plus
Okay.
B minus range, only because like you mentioned, the draft wasn't amazing. We'll see. But their success won't be based off the draft. But
Right.
it's mainly just like I think like you said, where you elevate the grade is based off of you retained your guys and you didn't like, completely overpay. Like Lopez is getting a lot of money, but it's only 2 years, so that's
Right.
not a big deal, right? Middleton, right? He didn't get as much as he probably would have gotten if he was healthy, right? So if he can potentially bounce back, then that looks like a steal. So that's where it's solid. It just seems like I just feel like on the margins is where I'm a little bit disappointed because it just seems like Malik Beasley was really like the only real guy that you basically brought in, and I just I don't really love that, and it's not even so much that he's bad. It's just like
It's not
I
enough.
just yeah, exactly. Because it's just like I would like to have seen them, maybe acquire some type of wing. But again, it's hard because you know when you're one of these type of teams, all you can really dole out is minimum contracts. And
They also
again,
signed Robin Lopez too.
yeah, yeah, and that's probably just again more big man insurance. We'll
Yeah.
see, but yeah, like that's the only issue. But like I mentioned, in fairness, when you can only really give out minimum contracts, it's hard to find, like those type of wings, for basically nothing, right? Because they
Yeah.
tried to kind of gamble with that with Joe Ingles last year, and I think that wasn't a minimum; that was like an exception level deal, and then it just didn't pan out, right? Like he just, he was hurt, right? He was recovering from a torn ACL, and he just didn't really look the same
Yeah.
defensively, so that just didn't pan out. But maybe they might be able to parlay one of these other guys on the roster into some type of deal at the deadline. So, because again, the roster right now may not be completely what it is, at the deadline. So we'll see. But that's kind of like I said, where I lean into like the B minus C plus range because I like, like I like bringing back all the core guys, but then it's like I don't really feel like they improved from last year. But again, they may not have to significantly improve. It could just be, hey, if we're healthy and Middleton is back to what he was, we should be better. And
Right.
so I think they will be better. Because again, like I don't expect them to go out in the first round again.
Right.
I don't think that'll happen
I
unless
agree.
again some catastrophic injury occurs. So that's why, like, I wouldn't give them like a D. You know what I mean? Like I think that's kind of harsh, but like I don't know. I'm not
I
super high
understand the C.
this offseason. And also like losing Javon Carter, right? That's a guy you could have brought back as your backup guard, and he's a solid option that's better than like that's better than like a minimum contract backup point guard.
Sure.
He's like a 3-and-D guy. He can kind of play with another guard like Holiday, or he can play as a six-man type guy off the running the second unit. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't love that, but we'll get into the next roster that he went to,
Oh boy.
in a minute. So well, yeah. So, but overall, like you said, it's acceptable. Like, I'm not if they don't win the title, I'm not gonna be like, oh man, like they really messed up last offseason. Like it was just mediocre to me.
Right.
It
I
was
get you.
okay.
Just average.
Yeah. So now we're gonna go into our last team of the Central Division, and that is the Chicago Bulls.
Yuck.
Um, and there's a lot to talk about, I think, for this one. So,
Yeah.
unlike I guess somewhat similar to the Bucks, they had a pretty rough year last year, but for different reasons, right? So we know a couple seasons ago, right? The Bulls were kind of, like the surprise of the NBA, right? Where, they had that offseason where they acquired Lonzo Ball, they acquired DeMar DeRozan. I think people were fine with the Lonzo deal, but I think a lot of people were not very high on the DeRozan deal, right? He was fine for the Spurs, but it almost kind of felt like, it seems like his best years are probably behind him. Then he goes to the Bulls, right? Has a great year for them. And they're one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, right? And then all of a sudden, right, Lonzo gets hurt, tears his meniscus, and it all goes downhill from there. And,
Pretty much.
instead, yeah, and, instead of like maybe they do something at the deadline where they can, really make some noise and challenge some of the top teams, right? Lonzo's hurt. They don't do anything. They go out in the first round to the Bucks. And then, Lonzo never comes back, right? He's still recovering from that injury. He misses all of last year. The Bulls had a pretty disastrous season last year, right? 40-42. They did make the play in, so they kind of had a little bit of a bounce back. I think, in after the trade deadline where I think they added a couple guys like Beverly to kind of make their defense better, but it just wasn't enough, right? They lost to the Heat in the play in, had a chance to beat the Heat and knock them out of the playoffs entirely, right? But just couldn't do anything down the stretch. Levine didn't play very well. So, now you're kind of looking at this Bulls team completely differently than we did a couple seasons ago because, obviously, I guess we can start off with one of the biggest things that they did in the offseason. They re-signed Nikola Vucevic, right? And at this point, I feel like if you're Chicago, I think you kind of have to say you lost that trade. Bringing Vucevic over to Chicago, right? I remember he came over from Orlando, and it was for what was it like picks and a couple players, right? So it's like
Yes.
you're the Magic. You have Wendell Carter Jr., you have Franz Wagner, and I think what was the Bulls pick this year? I guess it was the Jet Howard pick, right?
Yes.
So like basically you have those three guys, and it's like I think if you're the Bulls, I think you would probably rather have those three guys than just Vucevic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, not probably. You would rather have those guys.
Yeah.
So,
No question.
yeah, I mean, so it's just rough. I mean, again, like they re-signed him to a 3-year, $60 million contract, which that's fine, that's okay. But again, like it's just not a whole lot, of optimism or a lot to love. They did sign Javon Carter, which was kind of random. That was the guy that we mentioned that they poached away from the Bucks, right? They signed him, to a 3-year, $20 million contract. Like I said, which to me was kind of unexpected, but regardless, just bizarre because they already had a lot of guards on the roster. Even other than Lonzo, right? Kobe White, who they also re-signed, Javon Carter, Caruso, Desunmu, Zach Levine. You have a ton of guards on this team. I think they drafted Dalen Terry and Carlik Jones.
Yeah, they
So kind of
drafted guards.
yeah, so drafted other guards to the roster as well. Um, so yeah, with the starting five, with Lonzo out, you know, is it the Sunmu? He kind of started at different points. Sometimes they would start Caruso, with Levine, DeRozan, and Vucevic. Patrick Williams, right? He was their lottery pick a couple seasons ago. Had like, kind of a solid start, but just hasn't really been able to like gain a whole lot of traction since then. I know he's been hurt at different points.
Right.
Um, and just, also Chicago's been a really weird team. So like that's also not been a great experience, I think, either. Um, right, Drummond opted back into his player option, so he's there. They also drafted Julian Phillips, signed Torrey Craig. Um, yeah, so I think we talked about in free agency. We didn't really like a lot of what the Bulls did.
It was horrid.
So yeah, and again, like it all comes back to it's just brutal with the Lonzo's thing. Because again, like if when he was on the team and he was playing and he was healthy, they were really good, but without him, it's Levine and DeRozan, and I don't think that pairing is quite as seamless as having all three together.
Right.
Uh, and then it's like, you're starting Caruso, which is fine, but again, like, you'd like to have both Lonzo and Caruso. Um, and it's just again, it's just a brutal situation to be in. And I don't really know how you can get out of it, but it's like, because Lonzo's not going to play it all next season either. So, that's I mean, at this point, I almost kind of we've talked about it last season where it's like, I think the Bulls should probably consider kind of blowing it up. Um, and
Yeah.
move a number of guys off the roster. I mean, like when you look at DeRozan, I believe at one point there was like a rumors kind of suggesting he could be one of the next guys that asks out, of his situation, which, again, that makes a lot of sense, right? Given his age, and where he would, what he would probably like to do, in his career, right? He
He wants to
probably would
win.
prefer to yeah, he would probably would prefer to be on a team, where he's in a winning situation, right? He's 34, pretty much I think in the last year of his deal, essentially. So, obviously I'm sure he's going to look to have a really good season to secure, one last deal, for his career. So there's not a whole lot to love. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, some of the guys I like, Levine, I'm kind of up and down on at different points. There's some nights where it's like, oh, he's pretty cool, and then other nights where it's like, I don't know
Yeah,
about that.
like it
Um,
sometimes it seems like he's a waste of money. And that's
yeah,
no offense to him. It's just, based on his play, like you said, he's hot and cold. It's weird.
yeah, it's a huge contract. You got some injury concerns when he plays. He's usually pretty solid. Um, and then again, like I mentioned, some of the other guys, just not a whole lot to love. And again, like if you're the Bulls, I mean, again, that Vucevic deal just looks worse and worse by the day. Because again, just think about it, right? Obviously, you can't do anything about the Lonzo situation, right? But like, imagine, like, if you had like Lonzo, Levine, Wagner, DeRozan, and Wendell Carter Jr. That's I think a really good starting five.
Right.
Is it like a quote unquote championship starting five? Probably not, but that's a really good squad. I think if they're healthy, but um,
Yeah, this is
just
by
wondering.
far the ugliest roster I think we've seen in a long
Yeah,
time.
it's yes of the ones we've talked about in the East. Because again, like with some of the other teams, like say Detroit or Indiana, like those are not going to be great teams, but I think they'll be way better stories, right? You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
Bulls will probably finish with a better record than the Pistons, and you'll still come out feeling way better about the Pistons than the Bulls. Like I just
Exactly.
think the Bulls are in a really rough spot right now. They're kind of in that point where we talked about kind of with like Portland, um, in Washington last year, right, where they're in no man's land, right, where it's like
Limbo.
yeah,
It's
where you're
horrible.
not where you're not like the absolute worst of the worst teams, but you're also not really in the conversation of contenders.
Right.
So, and again, you lost a lottery pick to Orlando, right? It was, I believe, like I said, I think it was the Jet Howard pick. So, I mean, not a whole lot to love right here. So I don't really know what the Bulls do because, like I said, I think they should blow it up. I don't expect they're going to be that great next season, because I think without Lonzo, I mean, he's your best point guard. And you have a lot of other guards to kind of fill up the minutes, but they just don't do all, they all do kind of different things, right? Like Kobe White's more of like a scorer, kind of like a volume microwave type guy.
Right.
Alex Caruso is more of like a defensive minded guard.
Right.
Um, I guess, Javon Carter is kind of Lonzo Light, I guess, in terms of 3 and D, but he's very small.
Yeah,
So he
he's
doesn't give
yeah,
you the same size. And then Dosunmu's kind of like more of a scoring guard.
right.
So, I mean, you know, I guess yeah, you can kind of fill it up, and replace some of the production, but you're really not. So it's just tough, and like you feel bad because again, like this was a fun team to watch, when those three guys were healthy and playing together, but it's just completely gone downhill since then. And I think sometimes you just gotta kind of rip the band-aid off, and it's probably just time to I think to put an end to it. Like it's not gonna happen right now, but like
Right.
is it? It could be something to look out for maybe at the deadline or maybe in the offseason. Well, I guess in the offseason, DeRozan would be a free agent, so maybe it's a potential deadline thing. But
Right.
I think it is a team at the very least to kind of look to see what they do because, I think there's a lot of different things that could be done, but I just feel like what shouldn't be done is run this team back because it
Yeah.
just, without Lonzo, I don't really see a pathway for them to be really that
You
good.
can't succeed. They don't have a playmaker, like a legit playmaker. They don't have one that's gonna make Levine play better, make DeRozan play better. Like those
Yeah.
guys, I feel like I'm not gonna say like they can't be number one options. It's just they need somebody who can facilitate to them, and that's just
Like, I
not on this roster.
Yeah, like I think DeRozan's actually a pretty good passer, playmaker.
Sure,
But again, it's like Lonzo can also do that as well, and he can do some of that in the areas that like DeRozan's not much of a 3-point shooter.
exactly.
Lonzo is a much improved 3-point shooter at this point, and he just gives you more size because again,
Right,
that gives you size and flexibility. It allows you to run out those other guard lineups and not feel completely puny, right?
exactly.
Like you could have Lonzo and Caruso and Levine together, or you could have like Lonzo um, Kobe White and DeRozan, or like, Lonzo, Javon Carter and Caruso, right? Like, so because again, like Lonzo's 6'6", Caruso's like 6'5". Um, but without Lonzo, you're when you run three guards, you're really small. Um,
Yeah,
and
I'm
they
getting
they were
sick looking at this roster, dude.
yeah, they were a really tiny team last year. Again, like with Vucevic and Drummond, those were your main bigs, and then even at times they'd be running like Derek Jones Jr. as a center, or Patrick Williams as a center. It's just not a lot of great options, and like I said, it's just brutal. But you know, like they had that disabled player exception. I don't think they've used it yet, if I'm not mistaken. They had an opportunity potentially to use it to grab like a Christian Wood, but it didn't really make a whole lot of sense because they already had, a number of, other guys like, fours and fives on the roster, right? Because like DeRozan at this point for the Bulls plays a lot at the four,
Right.
right? Like it's kind of crazy because like he came into the league as a guard,
Yeah, he
but
came in as a two
now he
guard.
spends a lot. Yeah, exactly. But now he spends a lot of time at the four, at least for the Bulls. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's just I don't know. Like it's one of the biggest question marks this season. I think the Bulls is what the heck do they do?
they
Because
have a lot
they
of
would
work to do, man. It's rough.
right because they were even tied at different points, like to a potential Dame thing, right? Where it's like, hey, what if we get you Zach Levine as like a second option or something like that, But I don't, if you're the Bulls, I think I would first explore DeRozan before Levine, just because Levine's
Sure.
young. But Levine may also have more value. Um, and as his contract gets more and more expensive, his value may start to drop. Because he's probably not going to be better than what he is, like right now.
Right.
He's probably now about as good as he's going to be, for a while, right? So, I mean, yeah, like there's just a lot of questions, and like you said, it's kind of a sickening sight. But
Yeah, this is
again,
nasty. I'm actually about
yeah,
to throw up. This is disgusting. I don't like
yeah,
this roster at all. There's a
yeah.
number of things why.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, so I've talked about it a decent bunch. So, you might as well start giving your thoughts on the Bulls.
Yeah.
As
Well, like the number one thing that makes me want to throw up is this Vucevic. I don't like the re-signing. I don't like the extension, whatever you want to call it. $60 million for this guy is a little bit too much. I'm not trying to bash him. I don't think he's a horrible player, but it's just time to move on. There's just a lot of things where you can say, let it go. Just let it go. You lost the trade. Even in my opinion, I think it's time to let go of DeRozan. I feel like you're wasting, what years left he has in his career. Levine as well. Just let it go. Lonzo, you're not going to have him next season either. So it's like, ugh. It's just like a blow after blow. They just can't seem to get it right. And even like looking down the line, like, yes, they're deep, but it's not the good kind of deep, if that makes sense. It's like the
Yeah,
deep where it's like, what do these guys necessarily bring? And how many games is this going to win them? You know, Drummond, I love him to death, but I think he's a little bit past his prime as well. So it's like, what are we really doing here? I get, and even the signings didn't even make sense this year. Like Javon Carter, I understand grabbing him, but at the same time, I really don't. I think you could have done a lot better. Torrey Craig, I don't know. I don't know what the mindset here was when crafting this roster. And I understand the Lonzo Ball injury is like the biggest wrench in the entire thing. I think it ruins the entire roster because without Lonzo, clearly we can see they're not going to be as good as they, are with him. So
right.
I don't know. The only thing that I can say is it's just nasty. Levine, I'm not gonna say he's like overrated. I think he's pushing that overrated category a little bit, especially for the money that is guaranteed to him. I don't like that too much. DeRozan's in his last year. Like I said, Vucevic, not a good contract in my opinion. Definitely could have just let that one go. But geez, it's just not looking good for the Bulls. And like I said, the more and more I talk about it, the sicker and sicker I get.
Yeah, so the Bulls, are looking at, for the over-unders 37.5, basically ninth in the Eastern Conference. So essentially a play-in team,
Yeah.
that could potentially be out of the play-in, like I think that's probably about right because I mean, I just, like you mentioned, and like I said, without Lonzo, I don't really see a great pathway, to this being a really good team. If he was here, right, I mean, and I guess we can start getting into the grade, like if he was here, it'd probably be a lot easier to give them better marks,
Right.
but like, without him, it's there's not a whole lot you can really say. And
Right.
I
The
mean, like,
Lonzo thing is hurting them. It hurts them bad.
yeah, so I mean, and that's the rough part. Like I said, I mean, for now, I will say, maybe down the line in the season they'll move some of these guys. Um, but right now we can only really base it off of, what they did. So, I guess kind of like what grade would you give the Bulls for their off season?
I give them a big fat D. I'm not going to give them an F just because I do feel horrible about Lonzo, but this is the nastiest roster I think we've looked at. And in terms of what they've done in this offseason, wasn't a fan of their drafts, draft picks, excuse me, but they drafted two guards. Then they re signed another guard, Kobe White. Then they signed another guard in Javon Carter, and then they signed forward Julian Phillips. And it's like, okay, bro, what direction are we going here? And then obviously the Vucevic thing I just explained. I'm not a fan of that as well. So overall, not a lot to be hyped about. And then the Lonzo issue just keeps getting worse and worse, it seems. Although he has said that he is potentially coming back sooner than we think, but yeah, still doesn't
Yeah,
really get me super duper hyped about the
right.
Bulls and what their offseason has looked like. It's looked
Yeah.
like complete trash.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't really know how soon that's gonna be because they already said he's gonna be out all of next season. So,
Exactly.
you know, what's much sooner than that?
Right.
So, but yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think it's got to be like a D. Because again, like they did draft some guys. They did something. So but at the same time, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because, like you said, they already had guards, signed guards, drafted guards. That's a lot. Um, again, a couple of the contracts don't make a lot of sense. The Javon Carter one, I like Javon Carter, but I
Me
don't
too.
think he makes a whole lot of sense for this team.
Nope.
Um, Torrey Craig, he's a veteran. He'll do some stuff. Um,
But is
you
he going
know,
to win
but
you games though? I don't think they've done any moves to make them win games. That's my problem.
yeah, the Vucevic one, I mean, you can't let him walk. And for what it's worth, 18, 20 million a year isn't terrible. I mean, it's probably a movable deal. Um, but at the same time, like you might as well start calling the phones, and see if you can move them.
Exactly,
So
bro.
I don't
Get him
think you
out of
can
there.
do it right now. Yeah, because you can't trade guys, that you re-signed until later in the year. It's like maybe December, January, or something like that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's rough. And like I said, it goes back to the Lonzo injury, and the Vucevic deal. Like I just think those two things combined. But again, like the funny thing is, even despite the Vucevic thing, they were good, until Lonzo went down. So it
I
was
know.
really more so the Lonzo injury. But like I said, I still, in the long run, when the Vucevic trade happened, I'm like, I think he's a solid player, but like I don't think he's like a franchise changing thing, like,
Heck
because
no.
when yeah, when the deal was made, he was kind of treated as, like sort of like a upper tier, top 5, top whatever center, and, I don't think he's that. I think he's fine, but, he's not
He's
much of a
mid, bro.
defender. Okay, outside shoot. Yeah, he's fine. He's an above average center, but
Right.
I think if you're the Bulls, when you have Levine, who's not much of a defender, you have DeRozan, who's not much of a defender, you'd like to have a center, right, who's a better defender, rim protector than Vucevic, and I think Wendell Carter Jr. could have been that.
And he
I
has
thought
been
they
in
gave up on him.
Orlando, so
Yeah, I think they gave up on him too early. I mean, like,
way too early then.
yeah, like I understand the thought process of, let's get an established guy. But, at the same time, it just didn't make any sense, right? Because, like, the Bulls traded for Vucevic, I think, because that was when Levine was playing well, but the Bulls were not doing very good. So
Right.
they were like, let's get him a co-star. And I'm like, is it really is it really Vucevic? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know
He's
about that.
not the answer, bro. Trust me.
Yeah. So, and again, it's not hating on Vucevic.
No, not at all.
It just, again, I'm sure if you asked the Bulls if they could do that over, would they do it again? No, because again, like
Absolutely not.
rather have Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, even if Jet Howard doesn't do anything, like you'd still prefer to have like Wendell Carter Jr. and
Orlando
Wagner.
won.
'Cause yeah, Orlando definitely won that deal. So that's rough. And again, like you mentioned, and I mentioned, the Lonzo injury is the worst part of it. That's the main thing, that ruins everything
Yeah.
for sure. But all you can really hope for is that he recovers at some point and gets to play again. Because when he plays, he's really good. He's got better every year up until his injuries. Now hopefully he can get back on the court, right? Because when he first came in the league, his skill set was kind of raw, because he couldn't really shoot that well. But defense improved, shooting improved, right? Efficiency improved. So he got better. Now he needs to be able to find a way to stay healthy. Hopefully he can do that. We're all rooting for him.
Right.
But this team is not going to be good.
No, they're
Um,
gonna be horrible.
yeah, they're going to be bad, and I think we should probably start moving on to our other topics that we got to cover going the rest of the way.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the news and rumors. So we got a pretty serious topic.
Yeah, this
So
one's rough.
yeah, so Kevin Porter Jr., the guard for the Houston Rockets, right? He was arrested on
It's
on
ridiculous, bro.
basically domestic violence, strangulation, right? So some really serious
It's crazy, bro.
allegations. It's pretty awful. I mean, it's kind of rough because I think he was a guy that, when he was drafted, I think we were both kind of optimistic on him. I remember when he was drafted, the thought process was talented player, but he's got maturity issues. And it just seems like every year there's like something that goes on. He was actually drafted by Cleveland, and Cleveland let him go, gave him basically to Houston for nothing. Um, and then I remember, I think he had that weird situation, right, where I think he was taken out of the game, and then didn't want to go back in, and then he was sent home. I think along with Christian Wood, if I'm not mistaken. I thought at one point he had mentioned Houston had kind of saved his life. But now, I don't know what happens, right? So again, we know what happened, in terms of the domestic violence, the assault on his girlfriend. It's some pretty horrible stuff. So, I don't really want to get into all of that just because, you can look that up just because, but just know it's really bad.
It's graphic.
Um,
It's really bad.
it's awful. So, at this point, now you kind of have to wonder, what comes next. So, according to Shams Charania, it does sound like that Houston is trying to find ways, to, move him. I know that there's like, the NBA also has to do an investigation of their own to kind of see, what goes on.
Mhm.
Um, but it does look like Houston is, weighing a lot of their options. And, this is business. So it sounds like that the idea is they would try to trade him for draft compensation, right? Like they would get back second round picks, in exchange for the other team taking on his contract. He's got like a 4-year, $80 million deal, but only the first year is guaranteed at 16 million, and the rest of it's non-guaranteed. So whoever trades for him would be eating the contract. The difficulty, and a lot of this is according to Shams.
Right.
Difficulty kind of there is one is the optics, because of again, like there's going to be a lot of people obviously, or where if they hear, hey, we traded for a guy who's in pretty big trouble right now, right? That's not a great look. That's kind of what happened with Udoka in Brooklyn, where it was reported that Brooklyn was going to hire him, And then, I guess because of the optics, they ended up, not doing that,
Right.
because he was under suspension at the time. So, again, it's a horrible situation, and we'll see where this continues to go. I don't know. I don't feel like a team is gonna trade for him. Even beyond like, the optics of it, it's also like, if you're trading for him, you're basically gifting a player to Houston, for basically nothing. I mean, it's second round picks, but it's like, unless it's a guy that you have to get rid of because his contract is like so horrible or something, but like why would Houston want them? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to predict from this situation. Like I said, my gut instinct would almost suggest that maybe a team doesn't trade for him, but I don't know. What do you think,
Yeah.
overall?
Well, for me, I think his career is over. I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that I think it's done. Houston's obviously desperate. I think one thing that we did leave out was they're also ready to send several second round draft picks along with him. So,
Right.
they're trying to do everything in their power to get rid of this clown. Like, this is actually ridiculous. Um, you know, nobody wants to take on a felon, pretty much. He was arrested for a
Yeah.
felony assault. Like, that's ridiculous. I don't think anybody's gonna, stick their leg out or stick their arm out and sacrifice something to get a felon. I don't think that's in the play here. I think his career is done. It's unfortunate he wasted, all this talent, but I don't know. He's gonna have his day in court, so we kind of just have to go with that. If they find him, not guilty, doubt it, but then we can go from there. But as of right now, I think his career is pretty much done. I don't think he'll
Yeah.
be playing in the Houston Rockets uniform or an NBA jersey for that matter.
Yeah, like I said, my guess is I just don't see a team trading for him. I mean, like again, I've been wrong, before, because when we talked about the Miles Bridges thing, we weren't sure, whether or not he was going to play again. But I don't know. Like I just feel like again, like it seems like he'd already been kind of a problem for a while, and I just like think that like this situation would kind of be like, the final chance because it's like you can only get but so many extra opportunities and chances before, you probably just done. So,
Right.
I'm kind of where, you know, I think he gets cut.
He's
And
done. He's gone.
yeah, and I definitely don't think he plays again next season for sure. But we'll see. But yeah,
Because they're
like this,
trying to squeeze every little thing out of him, and it's
right.
like, first of all, that's offensive in my
Yeah,
opinion to be doing that in the first place. Second of
yeah,
all, just get rid of him, bro. He clearly isn't going to change. We've already seen this is a pattern. He has behavioral health issues, so I don't know, anger issues. Something's going on. Houston can't help him. I don't think anybody else in the NBA can help him. So bye bye. You got to go.
yeah. Like I said, I'm with you. Where it's just like again, you can only get but so many opportunities, you know, to change before like, yeah, you're not going to get any more opportunities because again, like
Exactly.
he's already been moved once. Had issues in Cleveland. Now he's having issues in Houston. So, like you said, I guess time to probably say goodbye. Because again, like I said, I don't see a team trading for him because, like you said, it just feels like kind of like a last desperate ditch attempt from Houston to just try to get something, anything out
Right.
of him. I mean, like I know that like they're not the team getting back picks. I think they're giving up picks, but it's
Yeah.
also like kind of like a get out of a contract free card, right? Where it's like he's only got 1 year guaranteed, and it's like, hey, let's take him and get a better player, and it's like, nah,
Nobody's gonna
eh,
bite for that, bro.
yeah,
It's bad
I don't
business.
see it. I'd be really surprised if a team did it because again, like like Shams mentioned, you just have the optics, and it just it's like, oh, we'll take him on for picks. Even though I think it did say that whoever traded for him would also cut him. So it's like it's not like a team is trading for him with the intention of keeping him and being like, we'll rehabilitate him. It's like,
Right.
nah, they're gonna cut him.
Yeah.
But it just I don't know. It just when I heard that about Houston, it just didn't feel right. It almost just felt kind of like I don't know, like kind of sneaky in a way, or just like I don't know. It just didn't seem like a good look. Like I get it's business, but it's not a good look just based off of the situation of what was reported. And again, like I encourage people, like look up the situation and just see how awful it
Yeah,
was.
you need
Because
to know what happened, what transpired. But in my opinion, I think the fact that they're trying to squeeze all this stuff out of him, like you said, is offensive. There's no other way to put it.
man, it's all ugly. It's
Yeah,
all awful.
it's nasty.
Um, so moving on into the next rumor, according to Bobby Marks of ESPN, the Sixers not trying to trade Tyrese Maxey. what a surprise.
Yeah, as they
The
should. Like what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, basically, like, it's like, hey, yeah, we would like Dame, but we don't want to give up Tyrese Maxey. Like, I mean, again, like you have to weigh a lot of things, right? Because it's like, maybe you trade Harden down the line. If you trade Harden, what happens with Embiid? Maxey, it's like, he might be your future. Because again, if you say goodbye to Harden and Embiid, what else will you have? Literally nothing. So,
Nothing.
you know, like I mean, at the same time, it's like, it is Dame, but at the same time, it's like, well, I don't think that would be enough because he's not on a big contract yet. So you would also have to tie him with another player, and it's like, I don't know about that one. So like, again, like it'd be cool if you could get Lillard, if you're Philadelphia, but I feel like that almost has to be like Harden, for a Lillard swap, and why would Portland do that?
Yeah, it's nasty. I think, like you said, the initial rumor was, they don't have any plans to trade Tyrese Maxey. Good. I think that's really just stating the obvious. You need to build with this guy. He could potentially be your franchise guard, but I don't know. I do understand, the rumblings, like you said, with Lillard. It would be nice to have Lillard over Tyrese Maxey. I think everybody agrees with that at this point. But at the same time, don't want to give up on a guy too early, and you definitely don't want to be in a situation where you're giving up a little bit too much for Lillard.
Yeah. Um. Next up, right, more Dame trade talks. So according to Shams, Dame trade talks to resume.
Joy.
So Portland and Miami are gonna start talking, basically ahead of training camp. They did say that Lillard will report to Portland if he's not moved. But only either Portland or Miami. So let's say if he gets moved to Philadelphia or if he gets moved to, Boston or something like that, he would not show up, right? So his demand is still, if I'm gonna be traded, I only want to go to Miami. Um, according to Tim Von Temps of ESPN, it also, he mentions there's no real Gobert like haul for Dame. Which again I feel like makes a lot of sense because again I think as awesome as Lillard is, and he had a great year last year, I think some people are still like, given his age, given his contract, do we really want to give up, something like Gobert, for Dame, Minnesota, right? Ask Minnesota how that turned out. And again, in fairness, maybe I'm being too harsh on Minnesota, right?
No,
Because
I think you're right.
yeah, because
I
Lillard
think
is
you're,
better than Gobert, but I just don't see another team giving up a ton for Lillard. Like I
people are
think a lot of
scared now.
teams,
Like you said
yeah,
earlier, market reset. You said that a while ago.
yeah, like I think a lot of teams like Lillard a lot, but again, are they willing to give up everything for him? I don't think so. I don't think people look at him in that same caliber,
No.
of guys where you give up the farm to get him. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
as great, as awesome as he is.
Yeah, and we love Lillard's game. Like, us over here, we're big time Dame fans, but at this point, like Portland, they just have to realize and let it go and just take what's given to them at this point if they want to
Right.
actually follow through with this deal, and they should.
Yeah. Because I'm not saying it's great. Like I'm not saying
Right.
it's amazing in terms of what Miami can give up, because it's
Right.
really not. But it's also
The
probably better than just having Lillard and just being
yeah,
mediocre.
it's the
Uh,
best and only available, so what can we do here?
Yeah, I mean, like, and maybe they'll wait it out, and maybe they'll go closer to the season or into the season. But I do feel like it will pick up and resume. Like, who knows at this point?
We hope.
But yeah, but we can only hope.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, according to Mark Stein, it says the Heat are expected to pursue Oubre. Again, that
Hmm.
feels more so like a thing where it's like, if we get Lillard, we're gonna do that. I don't really have an issue with that.
Yeah, I
It's
like
kind of
that.
like it's kind of like the Wood thing where it's like he's a guy that's better than a minimum contract, but nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted to sign him.
Right.
Uh,
Forgot about him. Wow.
yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah,
And
and
he's a good, solid player.
yeah, so yeah, because again, like a couple years ago, he was playing for, Phoenix. He was playing for Golden State. He's bounced around. So, you do kind of wonder, is there something, to why has he not been able to stick? But again, if you're Miami and you're giving him a minimum contract, I think that's a kind of a steal.
Yeah.
Especially if you
Oh,
can
for
find a way
sure.
to pan out. It gives you, some more athleticism, some more juice, at that guard wing spot, for Miami because they're not that athletic of a team.
And he's one of those
Um,
hybrid wings that we were
and
talking about.
right, yeah, and Oubre is a really good athlete. If Spoelstra and the Heat, can kind of find a way, to tap into him and get the best out of him, that's a really good signing. If they can do it, But
Right.
again, I think the Lillard thing has to come first, and that's and again, just the fact that all that's being discussed almost kind of makes me feel like it's gonna happen at some point. Could be wrong,
They're just
but
ironing out the details. I know it.
right. Um, In addition, right, we have, or I guess no, not in addition to. Moving on to the next rumor, the Kings waive two centers. According to Woj, Nerlens Noel and Nemias Keita, right? So they signed JaVale McGee, so those two guys are now going to be on the market. Will somebody sign them? We'll see. I mean, Noel, he played on the Knicks a couple years ago and seemed like he was a decent backup big,
Hmm.
but hasn't really done a whole lot since then. Keita, right, is just a young guy. He played for the Kings last year, so maybe another team gives him an opportunity. But it seems like they're pretty happy with their big man, depth. I guess, right? Sabonis, JaVale McGee, and Alex Len, along,
It's
I
not
guess,
a
with
bad
Trey Lyons.
core.
Yeah,
That's
so
not a bad
that's
core at all. I like that.
right.
I think that's smart. Once you sign, a better big man, I think we can all agree that JaVale McGee is better than both those guys, even, in his age. Um, you'd probably just want to, get rid of those two because there's no point in having, five or six centers on a roster, I don't think.
Yeah. Um, And now, so here's the funny thing. So we talked about the World Cup, and obviously we know how Team USA, did lose in the World Cup, right? They
Hmm.
didn't get bronze or silver or gold. But the funny thing is, so now it sounds like LeBron, it's gonna be like I guess the Avengers, where he's going around, grabbing the Infinity Stones,
Yeah.
to
The
link up.
Remind team, dude.
Yeah, exactly. To get all the top guys, guys like Steph, guys like Tatum, guys like Durant. So if he's gonna play in the 2024 Olympics, along with those guys who are also a little bit older, right? That's gonna be pretty cool if they can do it. Obviously we're at a point now where, again, I think the US still has like the most talent, but I do think now like it kind of is also important, I think, to try to emphasize the fit a little bit more because I do think some of these other teams have enough now where it's like you can't just, beat them because you have like all around just better guys. You know what I
And
mean?
that's
Like
what
I think
Kuzma was saying on Twitter.
right. Yeah, exactly. Because, it's like when we talked about the Team USA roster in the World Cup, right? Like we mentioned, like, we even though we did think that they would still probably just, advance as far as they could, we did mention that there were still some flaws with the roster, right? Like, because, Walker Kessler only really played because Jaren Jackson Jr. wasn't there in the last game, right? So it's like they didn't have a whole lot of like center depth. They had some guys that I think were kind of like pigeonholed in the roles that they're not really good at, right? Like,
Exactly.
Brandon Ingram is, a scorer, right? But he was kind of like pigeonholed into just being sort of like a, spot up guy,
Corner
right? Which
spot
is
up
not really
guy.
what he does, right? Yeah, exactly. That's not really what he does, right? He's not much of a defender, right? So he was kind of like, asked to be like a wing defender guy. That's not what he does,
It's
right?
dumb,
Um,
bro.
yeah, exactly. Like, other guys, at times, right? A lot of one-on-one scoring, right? Like a Brunson or Edwards. Again, like it just didn't work out. So, we'll see what happens in the 2024 Olympics, but, and then they're also apparently trying to convince Embiid, because he has the option of playing either for the USA or France. Obviously he'll play for either team. Um, but who knows? Because like with the French team, right? He might play more. Like which one? Because I've heard some people argue like if he played for Team USA, they might just start Bam, and have him be the backup because just he has a preference in terms of how he likes his teams
Sure.
to play. Whereas like if he plays for France, he might be more likely to start.
But
Kind of
like
bizarre,
with
but
France would be interesting though, because I feel like with France, wouldn't they technically have like three bigger
yeah,
guys? Like it would be what, Gobert, Embiid, and
yeah,
probably Wemby.
yeah. So like that's a really that's a really strong line, and a lot of flexibility and size and length
Yeah.
there. So I mean, like he's got some pretty good options, I think. Um, which one do you think he'll probably end up playing for?
For
Like if
some
you had to
reason,
guess.
I have a very bad feeling that he's gonna play for France.
Oh,
Kudos to him if he does choose France. Either way, I'm not gonna be angry. Or
right.
like I don't know, but I feel like he's just gonna choose France. The fact that it's even a discussion tells me that it's France, but and if there's some convincing needed, that also tells me that it's probably gonna be France as well. Um, but yeah, this Olympics is gonna be fun this year.
Yeah, especially if all these guys end up playing. It's in
Yeah,
Paris, right? So I mean, so it'll be. I think
big
it'll be
deal.
really and hopefully, again, we can kind of avenge, the losses, that we
Yeah.
had, in this World Cup because it was pretty rough.
Yeah, the Remind team. Like I've heard so many memes. It's pretty funny, honestly. But hey,
So
it is what it
yeah,
is.
yeah, we'll have another opportunity to become world champions, in the future. So
Exactly. But
yeah,
it's like,
so
wait, hang on. Before we move on, I feel like people have like, I'm sorry, I have to keep going back to this because that Noah Lyles quote is actually stupid. So people are taking it out of context, right? The quote that he said, he was talking about NBA, what, champions of the world, champions of the
right.
what, United States, right? He wasn't
Mhm.
referring to Team USA or anything like that. He was referring to the Denver Nuggets. That's what people don't understand. I feel like
Right.
that Denver team would probably wash, a lot of other teams, but
Yeah.
we can keep it moving.
Yeah. And then, I guess BI, according to Christian Clark of NOLA.com, he's going to wait on contract talks. Pretty much it's like, he's going to be eligible for a supermax, so it's like there's
Okay.
no point in signing an extension if he can get the supermax, right? Then obviously it makes sense to wait. We'll see if he can get
Sure.
it, right? Because the qualifications are pretty high, right? Like, isn't it like normally like All-Star or All NBA, right? So that's we'll see if he can get it. He has the talent, I think, to be able to do it, but also it's like, there's going to be a lot of competition for those spots in the Western Conference.
Yes.
Um, but I understand it because like just in general, right? Like historically, the extension usually nets you less money than if you wait.
Right. I agree. I don't really have a problem with it either, but we'll see what happens. I think he's a great player, and I think he definitely deserves a contract extension for sure. Especially
Yeah.
considering New Orleans, they're a little bit shaky right now.
Yeah, and then last but not least, we got a couple of small, very minor, team, I guess, additions slash subtractions. So Cleveland, they signed Tristan Thompson, right? So he's going back to Cleveland, I guess to kind of be like a locker room guy, maybe potential break glass in case of emergency backup center. And then Cameron Payne, right, or Campaign, right? The Spurs they waived him. So basically, I guess on a buyout, so he'll have an opportunity to join a contender, have a bigger role on a contender. I don't know which team is going to do that.
Hey,
Uh,
Milwaukee, man.
yeah, maybe Milwaukee. Because again, we mentioned the lack of a backup guard. He
Yeah.
might help, but we also know like at times his play can be kind of up and down. But
Yeah. He can
on a
play you out of
minimum,
the game sometimes.
yeah, exactly. He can shoot you into games. He can shoot you out of games.
Yeah.
It felt like the last 2 seasons he's done more of the
The
latter in
latter.
terms of the game. But again, on a team like Milwaukee, which may be better equipped to handle like the things he doesn't do on defense, and then like you have other offensive options you can
Right.
rely on. Maybe he might do better. That seems like it could be interesting. But again, I don't know if Milwaukee has any open roster spots at this point. So we'll see. But if it's not Milwaukee, who else would it really be? Because it's like I'm kind of almost at a loss in terms of like, what other quote unquote like contender would really need another, backup guard, would it be
Yeah.
like I don't know, like would it be
It's got to be somebody in the East though.
yeah,
I don't
would
think
it be
it's in the
like
West.
would it be like a Philly? I mean, they had Beverly, they have
That's a good
DeAnthony
one.
Melton, so I mean like you almost feel like they're okay, right? And then it's like I don't it's not LA because they're already set at the guard spot.
Hmm.
Um I get. I don't think it's Golden State because I don't think he really fits there, and they already have Steph and Chris Paul.
It's not
So
Boston.
yeah, it's not Denver because I mean I guess they don't really have much of a backup point guard, but they do have Reggie Jackson, so it's like
Yeah.
so I
It's
don't
got to
know.
be Milwaukee, man, but we'll see. Like you said, roster spots.
Yeah, I mean yeah, because that's the thing. It's just like you know it also I guess helps the Spurs because it means like it's another guy you don't have to worry about playing in the rotation.
Hmm.
Because again, he's a guy. I think we mentioned it in the Spurs rebuild or not rebuild, like it's 2K. Excuse me, in the Spurs discussion
Hmm.
for their offseason, we kind of mentioned like, yeah, he's a guy that's probably going to want minutes, but it's like, why? Like on a team like that. But now you don't
Right.
have to worry about it. So good for the Spurs. I am curious to see if he goes anywhere or if he just kind of just sits. He might be one of those guys where it's like you might have to wait until somebody gets hurt before another
Yeah,
person
emergency guy.
like because and we've seen that before. Like Blake Griffin was that last year for Boston where Gallinari got hurt and then they signed Blake Griffin. Where it's
Right.
like Dwight Howard was that the year with the Lakers where they won the title where I think they signed Cousins, right? They signed Cousins initially, then he tears his ACL
Yeah.
in an off-season thing, and then they signed Dwight. So
Right.
you know we'll see what happens. I mean, because again, he's had he kind of revived his career in Phoenix, and then they're like goodbye.
It kind of fizzled out. It was weird.
Yeah, exactly. Because he had a great postseason during their finals trip. Then he got, a solid contract, and everybody was like, "That's a great, contract for, one of the best backup point guards." And then, as it turned out, it's like he almost kind of reverted back to the guy, who had bounced around before that.
Yeah,
So
exactly. He literally went back to, like, the meme where he's dancing
yeah,
with Russ, the
right,
bad shots. It's just, I
yeah,
mean, like,
exactly.
and I love Campaign. I really like his game. I'm a Campaign fan, but at the same time, I don't know where he's gonna go outside of Milwaukee, but roster spot's not there.
If that's
So
if that's the case, maybe he should just go to the Clippers to dance with Westbrook in LA.
hey,
That's a
that
pretty
would be
big
lit.
that's a pretty big platform, to be able to show off
Exactly.
defensive moves. But realistically, they also have a ton of guards as well.
Yeah.
So
And I
don't
was
really.
like, Chicago, we just talked about them.
Yeah,
They have a bunch of guard spots. So
yeah.
hey,
Go to the.
man.
Yeah, so yeah, well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know in the comments, what you think of our thoughts on Milwaukee and Chicago. Because again, I think some people may feel a little bit differently about the Bucks.
Hmm.
Maybe they might feel differently about the Bulls. Doubt it, but again, it's always nice to hear, what people think in the comments. So don't forget to like and subscribe. We appreciate the support. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.